I think the the best place to start is maybe I don't think a lot of people really know exactly what a literary agent is. So maybe you could start by sort of explaining that and what that kind of what you do.
First of all, thank you for the invitation to join you. A literary agent, basically, in lots of cases, is the in between the author or the writer and up and coming potential publishing contracts that could come from their work. I know I'll be speaking of this with people that will recognize that already, but you'll have agents in lots of different genres, of lots of different backgrounds and experiences, lots of different relationships. Many of them have come up through the publishing industry. Others have worked with publishers. Others have entered the market through by their own works. And their job is to do exactly what I just mentioned, and it's to kind of do the networking, do all of the relationships, keep close to the publishers and the trends. And as they come to find writers or authors that they find or who approach them, they can then do the liaisons and the interlinks to see if there's a publishing opportunity. And if there is, then they continue and start that journey with the publishing house, liaising with the author, and just hopefully helping the wheels run a bit smoother, hopefully helping the publishing house to get everything done as what needs to be done, and the authors of the works in process, in process, to understand how that process works, because writers and authors come to this industry with various levels of experience as well. So that's what we see ourselves as agents and have done over the years. Lots of agents will work in different ways, but I'm obviously answering this from the context that we have and I've had, and that hopefully helps to summarize, what an agent does. Does that all kind of make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the basis of it, the basics of it. So I'm thinking, so let's say we have someone, I mean, who wants to query you, right? What kind of thing are you expecting when you get a query?
Well, hold on. Let's roll back a little bit because we haven't really heard about On Point Publishing particularly. Maybe you want to give a little bit of background on that, where it came from, how it particularly operates. Because I know, you're based in Europe and you also have folks in the US.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Michael. And that's no problem, Heidi. I just wanted to check if that was, a reasonable expectation to people's understanding so far. So I was going to move on with the On Point background, which I'll be reasonably quick with, because the company the organization started, the brand started with slightly different backgrounds to what I understand your audience could be. But I'll go through that now, and then I'll come back to Heidi's point, and then can open up the dialogue in all the various remits after that. But basically, if I can take people's imaginations or memories back to a cold December morning on Madison Avenue in New York City, with the smoke rising or the steam rising from the grids, from the underground, the tube, the taxis whizzing past, a little bit of background noise. There was myself and a small handful of us enjoying what is probably best described as a buzzman's holiday. So my own background comes from marketing, and then moving into publishing. I then developed experience into sales. Some of the others had media expertise. But if we go back to 2006, you'll probably recall that was a time that the internet was really trying to take hold, or really taking hold in like many cases. And from like corporate backgrounds and backgrounds that we all had, we'd all just been to a bit of a briefing meeting about a project we were working on, going to take 3 to 4 hours out of the day to go and see some sites before returning to like another meeting. And walking down Madison Avenue, we all started the conversation about the internet and how tremendous an opportunity and a communication it was at that time, but also how like limiting it was. And the like limitations came from the fact there were lots of websites that then gradually got their name as being like vanity websites, like digital brochures and leaflets. But any of the main content that was there was behind the scenes. It was behind password protect systems and networks and things that we've now come to term paywalls. So On Point Publishing came from a new angle of putting some of that communication, the really viable communication that we felt would help people or companies or organizations, into the digital process, into then like the digital sphere. Today we all call it content. People use content as a way to tease people to make further inquiries, but we were putting our content online and liaising. We're doing lots of different like networking opportunities. And that's where the essence of the New York brand and the New York scene came from, because yes, as like Michael said, that's where we've got people still based and then like associates. You'll tell my accent isn't like technically American. So I'm obviously from Europe. And as things then evolve for the brand over the years, it's helped to give a very like European presence. And we even have people across Asia. So that's like part of our growth. So what basically happened, and I'll round this story up quite like quickly, is that we utilized this brand in that context. We got so far with it, and then one or two of us got snaffled up by larger brands to go and do full-time work, or the brand itself was then approached for doing like communication campaigns. So the brand kind of came and went in itself as the extent of the projects that we worked on. And when I say brands, I'll leave people to explore the profile that we have on, say, Amazon and our own pages. But, I'm talking like top 2, top 3 brands of the world are brands I've worked on at the time, other brands since. And yes, it's kind of come and gone over the years, but as we've come to do more in the writing sphere or the communication spheres at the time, we all reached for the playbook that was on point to put that material into practice. So we then kept on going, and we had concerns that the brand was getting to a point we couldn't do that much with it because we were all busy doing other things. But then COVID created an automatic break in all of that, where a lot of people couldn't carry on with what they were doing. Bringing those 2 years of COVID to a very quick summary, we then decided to get agreement to take the material that we then used in all of these various campaigns, written campaigns and otherwise, put it into print with the legacy, experience and knowledge that it was successful. And some of it have been very, very successful. And that's where On Point Publishing now is. We're now putting a lot of this material online into books. And as we're moving through those developments, and a lot of that material is, of course, non-fiction, but then we're revisiting the experience that we had and going back into fiction and building up the brand and the organization from that point on. So hopefully that helps as a reasonably quick summary. That's where we've come from. That's where its essence has been. And regardless of where it is today and where it could be, our standards of excellence and working with high level brands is what we need to protect, what we work on, what we look for in people that work with us or with writers and authors and so forth. So that's our kind of general story so far.
Did you have a follow-up, Michael, or because
No, go ahead.
well, I'm interested. So it sort of sounds like you're coming at this more from the nonfiction side, but you're branching into fiction. And is that solely, this is sort of two questions, solely as an agent, or are you more sort of straddling sort of an agent slash publishing thing, uh, product?
Great. No, that's fine. That's a great question, and it's a good time to ask it. Yes, we're coming from initially from the channel of nonfiction because we have that material. It's good to go. We're just modernizing it. In some cases, we are doing checks and refocus just to make sure it would still work, and by making sure that it does. We've got five books pretty much ready to go on top of the 6 that we've launched at the moment, even though a couple have just got extension pieces. And we've currently just got the decision as to when we launch them, either before Christmas now or just after. However, based on other things that I said at the time and some of the brands we also worked with, some of the storyboards that we did, and the campaigns and communication campaigns and general work that we did, we also have a publishing background across both nonfiction and fiction. So we're moving more into the sphere of like fiction as well. One, because we've got the experience. We want to meet more people that are like us, that have got those like standards of like excellence. And even though we are where we are, I'm not going to pretend we're out of this world. We're huge. We're not. But at this particular stage, what we're doing is rebuilding the infrastructure of like production and for print. But even if we do put a book online with the main channels that we all know, our essence is to continue working with them, but to reopen our own channel, which gives us more availability and access to the market. Not to be price competitive in any way, that isn't our agenda, but it obviously means if we can control a little bit more access to the market, we might get more control on the margins, for instance. We might get more control on the quality. All of those things we can pass back into the writing, the writing sphere, and then the writers and the authors that we work with us. The intent is building the brand outwards again from that point.
So, I mean, a lot of people who come in here, we're all on the writing side. So, I mean, Michael is the exception. He's got a really good understanding of branding and marketing more than well, I can speak. I won't speak for everyone, but in general, I would assume. So, when you're talking about channels, when you're talking about these things, about supporting the work, I mean, is that sort of the thing that the literary agent slash publisher, that's more what they can provide to the writer? I mean, it is a partnership in many ways, and it's a creative partnership, which makes it complicated, because creative people aren't necessarily the best at selling. So I'm kind of like, I mean, how do you see that approach working?
Um, yes, that's exactly what it should be, and you just used the perfect word there in terms of partnership. That's exactly what an agent should be to the writer, and the writer or the author should say to the agent. What often happens, and we found this, and I'm conscious the description and the introduction I just made was very much about non-fiction, but hopefully people will understand the journey we're taking back to fiction. But we've got editors on the team that are award-winning editors. They've done screenwriting, they've done screenplays, they've done things for film. So even if my background isn't quite 100% fiction because I've been mixed in with like the non-fiction side. We've got people on the team that are. So when we come to meet authors, that's where we place the relationship and we like generate things from there. But you also touched on another thing there, Heidi, in terms of what authors expect and what their understanding is. So an author writing the first or even the second or third book still might not know how a decent sized publisher works. And a decent sized publisher obviously would want to find these authors if they've got quality work, but they might live with a little bit of fear of meeting some authors that are high maintenance or having to understand or having to explain how they or the market works. So what an agent does is it takes some of that, what we might otherwise call pain, out of that process. If there's any explanations to be done, that lands with the agent. If there's any expectations to be managed, the same. And moving back to the agent side, but again, I think for like the publishers at the level above, they want to meet people that they can work with work that will be respected, and they're not going to entail any complications down the road in terms of how it's published, the quality, the front page cover, anything like that, or even down to then like the distribution. And one of the key things of a good sized publishing house is that it's got increased distribution and other relationships with other resellers in the market that a good author can then take advantage of.
Let's kind of roll back to, say, the beginning of things, the writing, and what a writer should be considering and when they should be considering approaching a literary agent. You know, what kind of state do you want the work to be in? Do you want a kernel of an idea? Do you want a completed manuscript? Do you take it case by case? You know, what works, what doesn't in general?
Yep, that's fine. I mean, like the first thing that I say is that pretty much all agents and publishing houses will work in their own way. So I'll answer part of that question in terms of what we're happy to receive when we're looking for queries and say like manuscripts. The other part of the question needs to remain with the agent or publishing house that an author might then approach. I'm saying publishing houses there because some of them will liaise with authors, but in the large extent, I know this like dialogue is revolved around the agent. But the like first thing is to understand exactly that. It's to understand exactly what that agent that you might be approaching is expecting. I think most will expect to see something of a structured like manuscript, even if there's still some work to be done. They need some evidence that a writer has created something, that they've put something together, that an agent has got something to see. And the reason why I say that is that as agents, we can have conversations all day long with up and coming writers that have got ideas to create and write something, but never get around to actually creating it because full-time jobs, other interests get in the way. The like reality check of how difficult writing a manuscript can be is so. One thing I would always think an agent wants to see is some kind of evidence to what a writer in this case, because they might not turn into an author, but an author of work or an author has got. The other thing that the agent wants to see is if that work is like very relevant to them. I mean, I put together a model of things that I can suggest people look for. It's a little bit different to then like the norm, but a lot of the time we see people making contact with agents without really knowing what the agent is looking for. And that's one of the biggest reasons in our experience that people don't hear anything back or they get like rejections. So you need to get to a point of relevance. That are you contacting the agent with relevance? Do you have something to show them? And do you have something that's as good as it can be in your eyes and in your mind? From our own point of view, we'll happily accept something that isn't perfect. We're a little bit unique that our editing team is consolidated together. So we have editors and proofreaders and people that really focus on the structure of a story. I'm concentrating on the fictional side of things. If there's a few typos in there or the formatting's out, that doesn't matter because that can be sorted out later. But that is different for every agent and every publishing house. But if people have got something concrete to show with an essence of what that agent is then like looking for, that I think is usually a reasonably good place to start, depending on the agents or like the publishing house.
So I would just sort of highlight, I mean, there's 2 points that I always think are important with literary agents and publishing in general, and I think you've hit them is, is one, you would agree that it's probably very important that you can work with the person, that you have it's like hiring someone. It's like you'll hire the person that you get along with better, than, say, the person who may or may not be more qualified. Would you agree that there's some truth in that?
Yes, I do. I will add what will hopefully be seen as additional detail and value to that in terms of what you're ideally looking for with an agent in our experience and in our opinion is a partnership. So yes, if you're hiring someone, we know that there's a hierarchy there. Um, you know, with all the good and bad experiences with employed jobs and things. But that like comes to like the fore, and your agent will ultimately be liaising with the publishing house. So there is still a little bit of like a hierarchy on like that side. But ultimately, what you also need to ideally find is a safe space that you can bounce ideas within. So you can bounce ideas with your agents and be reasonably thick-skinned or like confident that they've got your best interest at heart, even if they say no, that idea won't work, or it's a crazy idea, or however they want to phrase it. And the agent also needs to know that that's how you'll take it. If what you tell them is like different to what they might expect. And I guess the best analogy I can like quickly think of is a relationship with your best friend. You know, there are some agents that won't want that kind of relationship. And again, this is how finding the agent that works for you. If you want someone that's a bit more noble, a bit more hard pressed, that's then your decision as an author. But some of the best relationships we all have in our lives are not necessarily from our partners or our parents or our relatives or whoever they may be, but it's our best friends. It's a safe space to raise an idea, get genuine support or acknowledgement back. And if someone thinks it's not a good idea, then you take that opinion safely. So it's a bit more professional than being a best friend, but it goes along those kind of lines if you can understand where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, Dan, you have a question? And if anyone else wants to ask any questions or wants to contribute, just ask for a mic. You're more than welcome.
Hi. Yeah, I was thinking about like different media. I was thinking about like you have agents in like different forms of entertainment, like the music industry and the film industry, actors agents and stuff like that. I was thinking like for literary agents, um, basically once a writer finds an agent, can they be sort of cross media so, like for example, like could the agent perhaps help the writer firstly have a novel, for example, published, and then maybe a comic, or is it always one sent to one media basically?
Well, that's a really good question, and I guess it's more pertinent to the agents involved and the authors and where they want to take the work. But you're right, there are agents that work across different mediums. We're living in an age where there's lots of different mediums for the same content. So a written book, I mean, it's fantastic to hear stories of written books that get turned into movies, or television programs, or series. To get audiobooks, there are agents that like specialize in that. So I think, and this also now comes to some of the difficulties that an author will face. A lot of authors don't come from this background necessarily. A lot of writers, using the term writers there, as we know, are very introverted. But all of a sudden, they ideally need to get a business head on in terms of where they think or feel their work could go and is likely to go. Now, some writers that we know just want to sell a few books of the year and make something good of a decent hobby. Others are more ambitious. Even the ambitious ones, however, would rather possibly see their book in print opposed to being on TV or on the glitzy screen. So I think the best answer I can give there, Dan, is to try to evaluate that as the writer in the initial sense, or the author with like the completed work. And if you genuinely feel that written work has got further longevity, that will give you some notion as to the type of agents that you might be wanting to start reaching out to. So it's a very personal choice, as well as having an open mind, I think, in terms of where that work could be, how that work could be judged, should I say, when it reaches a different kind of like professional kind of like viewpoints. And let's not forget, we've got organizations out there with experts in all of the different fields. So you might want to find an agent that concentrates on those organizations. We might not be talking about one person there. We might be talking about an organization with like several. So you've really got to try to assess this as best as you can and be open-minded to the feedback that you get when you hopefully start to get some feedback. I think that's probably about the best answer I can give from like viewpoints and ideas that we've seen.
Let's build off of what Dan was talking about and ask you, what is the right way or the wrong way to go about querying?
Yes, I've touched on a few points already. I think the general context is to find an agent and understand what it is that they're looking for. We've like touched on that. It sounds kind of like self-explanatory, but it's amazing how many authors don't do that before they put time into sending a query letter and maybe or maybe not sending a manuscript at the same time. And I say that's a key reason why lots of people get lots of rejections, because their query just lands on, well, doesn't even land on an empty doormat, to use a posting kind of like metaphor there. It lands against a closed door. So that's like the first thing that we notice. Secondly, see if you can find out which publishing houses that agent works with or for, because you might have some idea in terms of the opportunities your work will have. So there's no point liaising with an agent that isn't liaising with the right kind of publishing houses. Now, Yes, I'm talking about authors here that have worked very hard to create their work, but the the medium and the channels that we're talking on now, other things that have access to them, even other social media platforms are great resources to get that little bit of extra info to find out who it is that you should be approaching. And once you've got those ideas in mind, you can start to stack up your approach and build a very important word I'm now going to use, and I think I touched on it before as well, but to build in the relevance of that query. Because without relevance, your query, your pitch, if you like, your introduction isn't likely to kind of like make it through. So I think those are the top two or three areas that should be followed with every query. That lots of authors that we find don't do that. They just send out lots of query letters and kind of hope for the best. But there's some additional aspects that we always find seems to help a little bit better. So I don't know whether I come off whether I stop and take a couple more questions on that, or whether you want me to roll through what do you think what might be best?
Oh, I would suggest you keep going. I mean, in terms of what's best for a query letter. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just mindful, I don't want to take over all of the airwaves, but I'm also there can be quite a lot of information on this topic to take in. I think one of the other things that's vitally important, and again we have touched on this already, and it's kind of like an X factor that not many people do, and that's to evaluate you as the author where you want your work to be. Okay. Now, it might seem quite straightforward and somewhat glib to say every author wants to see their name in lights and the books sell tens of million copies every week, but not every author wants that. I touched on some of these things before. To express a more realistic reality is that not every author can expect that at that particular point in their career and at that particular point of the kind of books or the kind of products. One thing we don't like here at On Point is the transition between the author to the publishing market, where there tends to be a cutoff where the emotional impact of the book, the passion, the work of art or the masterpiece, like many authors think their work is, and in lots of cases it is. But the cutoff between that and it being a commodity, and nothing more than like a commodity. So we try to soften that approach, and we try to bring the values of the author through, not necessarily always in a publicity sense, but in terms of the attributes of what the author can still bring into the process. That makes it a bit more engaging for the author and the audience as well. So, if you're writing your first book, then unless you've got, years of experience in the market of the particular field and you're good with the written language that you're using it in and the communicational sphere, you might need to be realistic in terms of who picks up that book or that kind of product, if I need to use that term, initially, once it's done. You might also need to be realistic of the kind of following or the audience that you've got. We've had to keep On Point in the background for many years because we've been working with these other brands, and hey, we've had some great experiences, and we've got some great relationships. But the work we did for those brands was for the purpose of those brands. So what we never did was come up in the middle of all that and say, hey, this is work from On Point Publishing, or this was based on material used from On Point Publishing. We kept ourselves behind the scenes, which is one problem we now have, in that a lot of people haven't heard about us, even though we've been going for like 20 years. That's the essence of the team that started this and some of the people that are still involved. So we're going through the same pain now of building followings and things, even though I would always say to an author, don't worry about if you've got a small following necessarily. It just means that the publishing house or whoever does the marketing for you has got a little bit more work to do to build the audience. But again, if you get through the process with a good agent and a publishing house, the whole idea is they introduce you to audiences that you might never have. So an audience could go from literally zero to hero overnight, or metaphorically speaking. But then that also comes to another point, probably like the last point, just before I stop for a small break, and that comes to the personal essence again, because you need to ask yourself as an author that if you really have been working on this book for the last 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, or 5, and even if I mean, look, we're all introverted and extroverted in some way, but writers, stroke authors probably lean more towards the introverted sense in lots of cases, because if we weren't, we wouldn't create the works that we did. Yes, here I am speaking on X, and I've done conferences and things, and I've worked in sales, so I've got quite an even keel between introversion and extroversion. But even the material I've produced, I've had to do that from an introverted sense. But you also need to ask yourself that if your book goes from zero to hero overnight, with whichever publishing house it is, have you got the mental scope or the mental agility at this stage to handle that? Because we've seen things that, and going back to the point that Dan asked about before, we've seen things not just in writing but across other medium where people have really struggled, and I won't labor how they've struggled, but they've really struggled to really severe like consequences by getting that kind of overnight fame. It's different to how people can like imagine it. You can't imagine how overwhelming it could be and those feelings. The reason why I'm bringing this up now is not to necessarily fear people, but it's to introduce the fact that that could give scope to the agent and the size of publishing house that you ultimately pitch to. It might be one reason why you get to decline if your following is very low. It could be because lots of agents and like publishing houses do judge authors on the following and things. But it might also be a key reason as to why you're careful as an individual. So you can maybe start off your publishing career with them, with one book, and then have in mind the second book, but then tier things accordingly, not just to your mental ability, but to your lifestyle, to your family, to your full-time job, if you still have one, if that's what you do, if you're balancing your writing career with a full-time job. Because taking on different responsibilities at different levels, whoa, that's something that people really need to like take on board, and it comes back to managing expectations.
You bring up an interesting point about, and I about that, and I think a lot of, well, you brought up a lot of interesting points. I'll start with the last one in terms of how much can you handle, you know? Um, it's funny when you were talking about that, I know there's a writer on here, I believe she published indie, but she got basically attacked in the Atlantic the Atlantic Monthly. I'm sure everybody kind of has heard of that magazine. And she's locked her account, changed her profile picture where it's the back of her head. It was that sort of thing. So I mean, I think that's like a very current example of that. Um, all from publishing a work of short stories. So, and then they were obviously going on there, and it as is everything these days, it became political um, for no real reason. I mean, you wrote a book of short stories. It shouldn't be attacked because someone doesn't like that. But this is an interesting point you bring up about sort of the culture we live in right now. It's like building that platform in such a way that you are able to tolerate it. And I can't speak to that personally, but I think I think that's really an important thing. And I think that,
Yeah.
going forward, I mean, in terms of especially just the culture we live in right now,
Mm.
we're pretty rough with each other at the moment. I mean, and
Yeah.
honestly, maybe it's always been that way. But it just seems to be pretty stripped bare at this particular juncture in time.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I mean, like mental resilience. I mean, the word like resilience has been bandied around a lot, especially since COVID, or as we all emerge from COVID. But I've had to be around like resilience pretty much all of my career. I've worked in sales, as I said. You have to be resilient in that for good and bad days. You have to be resilient for good and bad days in the office. Um, and you certainly have to be resilient in like this market. And I mean, there's people that are faced that need even stronger resilience than that. I mean, I won't go into their stories, but some of the other circumstances people that face these days with what's going on in the world right now. Wow, that is just mind boggling to me on its own. But you most definitely need to be open minded to things like that. And an agent and a publishing house can obviously do their work. They'll have like PR agents within their mix and things, so they can try to protect you a little bit, but they might not be able to protect you from all. That's a really difficult thing to try to work up towards when you might be an introverted writer. Because I keep using that word, but it's something that we see often, or like feel often when we like speak to people. But in like some cases, it might not even go that far. It just might be someone starts to feel really uncomfortable about 10 million people buying their book when they would have just been happy for 10,000 people to buy it. It's like that kind of context. And we've seen artists over the years in music that struggle with the fame. They might not struggle with the fortune. People struggle with fortune, yeah, but they probably struggle with the fame and everything that like comes with that. And that's the impression that a lot of people get before any success kind of comes. So it's a point I just wanted to throw in, because that might put a scope in terms of who you approach. And it might also make you feel more comfortable about who you then eventually do approach. Because, there are some interesting perceptions of certain people in like publishing houses. Some of those perceptions are wrong. Some of the perceptions that we hear are right. It all comes down to individual people. But if you find an agent in that sense that's got similar values and ambitions and interests as you, or at least understands where you're coming from, then that's usually a pretty good place to start, because they'll understand your hopes, your fears, and then can manage the expectations, like I've already mentioned, at the same time.
You know, it's an interesting point you bring up about that. And I think a lot of people on here, on X in general, sort of go the indie route, because I think there's a feeling, I among a lot of people who publish independently, which you can readily do these days, via Amazon. You don't even really have to do layout. I mean, you don't, obviously it's not going to be polished on the level of something professionally laid out, but you can do it.
Hmm.
Uh, my point being is they'll go that route because they feel that the work they're doing will not be accepted by any, say, traditional publishers. And so I'm just wondering, I mean, and I think this fits into kind of what you're talking about in terms of, this relevance to what a literary agent will do. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I when we talked before this space, I got the impression you guys are sort of trying to sort of fill that gap to a certain extent. Dan, I see you, but why don't you ask after this? I apologize. Go
Sure.
ahead.
No, it's fine. I can see Dan's hand up there. But yes, that I mean that is a space that we're trying to fill, and we know we've got work to do. We know we can't take every author's piece of work and put it to where the author may want it to be, or even where that work deserves to be. We've got a writer now who, wow, when I read through the stuff, I thought, geez, this is different. Other members of the team have then read through it. This is what a publishing house does, and it's really special stuff. It's really different. The feedback, the interest is there. Because they're busy doing other things, they don't really want to do the self-publishing stuff. They're not really motivated by money. They're just doing it for a little bit of interest. But we said to them, look, yeah, we can do something with this and we'd love to, but we probably don't have the distribution just yet to do that. Now, we prefer to be honest. And if that writer takes the work elsewhere before we get to a size where we can, then that's fine. But the point I'm trying to make there is that we have that dialogue with the writers. We try to soften the experience. We do only have limited resources, as every agent does. And, if we can manage those expectations and bring people on board, then we will. And
Sorry about that. Go ahead and unmute, Mike. I think something got accidentally pressed.
no, it's
Correct.
fine. So, sorry. I tried to come to the end of the point because I realized that there was a question before, but yeah, we'll try to soften that experience, and look, even now with writers that we can't actually do anything with because they might be different genres, they're reaching out to us on X, and we're on these channels. We're not just on the channels to build a following for our own purposes. What gives us our enjoyment between the otherwise quite hectic or busy or pressured days. We just enjoy engaging with people, answering questions. So if we can throw a few hints and tips in there, not just by the contents, but by not even just by comments, but by emails and things, which is a standard way a lot of people seem to be making contact with us, then we will. And then we'll take each week, each month as it comes, progressing our business model as best as we can.
We keep losing Dan. Oh, Dan's back. I know he has a question. Let's see if he can. He's going to be in the tunnel for a second, probably about now. Let's see if we can get him up. Dan, can you hear me? Are you up? All right, go. No, you're good.
A call. I wasn't sure if it presented a problem for the space. Sorry if it did. But I was wondering, to do with querying and stuff like that, is there a way we can is there a way that writers can safeguard their information, their writings basically being stolen, or copyright theft, or yeah, that's I was wondering about. And not
Sorry, Dan.
Not necessarily a question for a guest here, although if you want to answer it, but perhaps also for Heidi or Michael. I'm not sure.
Oh, why don't you go? I know that at least in the States, the minute your intellectual property is protected the minute you create it, technically. But yeah, I mean, I saw something on here. I'm not sure if the woman. I think it was dare I say, a literary agent who posted something on X saying, I got this great idea from this writer, so I'm wondering, if someone else could work it up. Basically taking someone else's idea, saying, I didn't like their writing, but I want to get a better writer to work this up. So I mean, yeah, unethical things happen. That's the reality of life. Mike, I'm sure you could probably speak to this. as well.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yes. Another great question, Dan. And Heidi's absolutely correct. I think, obviously, I'm speaking from Europe, but I can't quite recall the facets of the act. But there's a Geneva Copyright Act, and that's exactly the case. That as soon as a piece of work is then like created, that belongs to that author or that owner of that content in some cases. And I think the biggest issue is, it's okay to share content on social media as long as it's attributed back to the author in this case, or the owner. I'm just referencing that for you know little snippets of paragraphs or like poetry things that we've seen on Twitter, depending on what like groups that you follow. But it's certainly not right to take credit for it, and it's definitely not right to put it out there and earn money from it unless you've got a financial agreement in place with the owner. I think to ease some concerns, based on the question that Dan asked, is that what we're talking about here with the agent side or even the publishing houses is a really professional relationship. Okay, so I know we've used different metaphors and finding someone that you can liaise and speak with quite like safely, but ultimately the like relationship is like very like professional. So there shouldn't be any aspects of that, but more to the point, when it does get to the point of sharing manuscripts or things, then ideally there should be some written or very firm understanding in place in terms of that work will be protected. And I think what I need to touch on here is trust your instincts. If you don't feel everything is covered, then go back and evaluate to the point of where it can be. But when it comes to dealing with agents, again, every agent works in different ways. There are lots of agents that don't want to receive a manuscript first time round. One, it chews up their inbox and takes up memory on their like device. Probably even before that, they haven't got time to even look at the manuscript. So then like, what's the point? And thirdly, they probably don't even want the liability of having that author's work under their like responsibility. But if an author was to research what an agent is looking for, that then comes down part and parcel to the initial approach. And then you can evaluate the safety of sending further details or your manuscript later when it's needed or when it's asked. So I think that's the, probably about the best way to answer that. You just got to evaluate things first and foremost, but kind of like beforehand.
Because I know you've got a little bit of time left with us. Let's dial into, negotiating contracts and, advances, royalties. We kind of touch on rights a little bit, but there's probably some other fine print points that you might like to address in terms of securing a publishing deal.
For sure. Now, again, I think a point I've covered a few times in this space so far is about researching the like market. I kind of come from a viewpoint in, instead of spending the time sending query letters out to 100 agents and probably getting 100 rejections or not hearing anything back at all, why not consider spending the same amount of time researching those agents and the publishing houses and the market? Because if you can go to whichever body you approach first, agent or kind of like publishing house, the more knowledge of the market you've got, the better. One, you'll be taken more like seriously. And then, like, secondly, there'll be less gaps for that person or that team of people to then fill. The reason why I bring that up in direct answer to that question is you'll start to get some feeling or some idea in terms of what kind of contract you're likely to get. Going back to finding the right agent for you, by this point, you're probably several weeks, if not several months down the line. If it's a finished piece of work, that'll be a little bit shorter. If you've made contact with an agent and some amends have been then discussed, then it might take a bit longer. But you should be at the point of trusting that person implicitly. So to take what they say seriously, and they need to be able to take you and what they tell you seriously as well. So a lot of things will then be evaluated. The standard and quality of work. So let's just take it for granted it will be a good quality and standard. Any kind of marketing that's been done, or like pre-marketing, or say like followers on like social media. What needs to be done by the agent or then the publishing house in terms of them like promoting the book, all the way down to how much work may still be left for the ultimate editor, the people that structure the storylines, considering the fact this feature is more towards like fiction, and how much work is involved for proofreaders. A lot of that can like come into the fore. When we liaise with writers, and so we've been looking for writers of like certain genres recently, what we tried to do from an ethical viewpoint is give every writer, author, an equal value of contract or say opportunity moving forward. Now that doesn't mean to say that everyone will be on exactly the same deal, because some writers will need more emphasis in proofreading or editing. Other writers or authors will need more help with like the marketing. All of those aspects engage an awful lot of cost, and even looking at a query, so like proposal, even 2 or 3 pages of detail about what the storyline what might be about, and it's certainly by the point we get to actually look at the material, our publishing house and ourselves has invested a small fortune. It might be a fortune of time, but there's still a transactional cost with by the people involved. So we have to take those things seriously. But whether we then turn to an author and say, yes, it's great, we can do this, but we'll need to do more like marketing, or we need more editorial things. What we prefer to do is then work very kind of then like transparently in terms of what the costs of that are and the timescales of that, and that then ultimately works into the process. Because there's like nothing worse than being an author, going to an agent, coming away with some kind of deal through a publishing house or whatever, and wondering or feeling whether you got the best deal or not. And I think we can all resonate with that as consumers in the marketplace, whether it's buying a car or anything that's got a point of, say, like negotiation, or even in our full-time jobs. A lot of us have to buy things, within our jobs, or kind of like negotiate contracts. So we come at things from that angle, where at least everyone knows they've got a fair deal, but they just know it's a little bit more emphasis in various ways, and that's how then like transparent we can be. So going back to the point of other authors with other agents, is that it's best to consider what you think, or then understand what your piece of work needs. And by doing your own research beforehand and feedback you would have had with your agent and the relationship that you've got. I mean, I'm talking about a relationship here again that should be 1,000% trusted. There might be a lot out there that aren't, but the more that relationship can be intimately trusted in like that sense, the better, because the agent will evaluate the prospective value of your piece of work on the market. And also you need to take on board the reference to like the publishing house who are ultimately going to invest the most in your work to take it forward. And that then, I know it still leaves a variance of what's what, but if you understand where people are coming from, then you usually get to a pretty clear understanding and agreement, with a lot less hassle, for one of a kind of like better word.
So I got a couple of questions on a couple of the points you hit. I'm trying to think which one to ask first. The first one I think is how, maybe if I ask like what are say 3 points on how do you research an agent? How would a writer research an agent? Maybe like 3 points so we can simplify it. Would be my first
Great.
question.
Yeah, okay. Would you like to ask your second question, or shall I answer that one first?
Well, second question is a little longer. I think many of us have heard the infamous thing where someone will say, I can read the first sentence or the first couple sentences or the first 3 paragraphs and know whether or not this writer's any good, in terms of sending a query out to someone. So my second question is around that statement. I was curious kind of what you think of that. What's your approach to that kind of thing? It's a little broader question than the first one. So feel free you can approach either of those however you would like. I mean, they both involve the querying process. And I think that's kind of terrifying for most writers because it's sort of like,
Sure.
oh my God, if my first sentence isn't, right out of Orwell's 1984 or isn't Jane Austen or something, I'm done,
Yeah. Okay. Right. I'm just making a quick note, so I hopefully don't forget any points. I think I'll try to answer the second point first. Okay. So what you said is like correct. We keep an open mind that the middle bit of a book might be better than the start. That might be a little bit foolish for us, but we've come across some really good gems by like doing that. I think we'll all have come across books where the ending isn't as good as the stuff that came before. but we'll also all like resonate, I'm sure, with the fact that when you go for job interviews or you manage a job interview, you make a decision on that person in the first 10, 20 seconds or so. And these are all the inner instincts that we all have. I mean, the ability to tap into those for personal benefits or for commercial gain is a conversation I can have. One that's best left for another day. Should I be invited back? But in essence, it is those aspects that we need to kind of consider. What I will say is that as writers, as what I think most of your audience are or are planning to be, we should have the innate opportunity to write the best we can in terms of an intro to a person that we're trying to gauge a relationship with. Yes, it'll be different than writing fiction, but we've got the skills of words. So I think you need to then consider again what it is that you're sending through. Do you feel that it's the right context? And then put your best foot forward. Now, look, I also know by saying that someone starting their writing journey today might make a few mistakes in doing that. And going through the same process in 3 or 4 years' time, they'll get better results. That's like a learning curve, and we all have to be open to a learning curve. But I think you need to evaluate again, to use that word, in terms of what you're sending through, and making sure it's of the quality that counts. What I'll quickly do is I'll then dovetail the other question, the first question that you asked me there, Heidi, in terms of 3 points for agents. And I think I've probably touched on a couple of them already in terms of researching the agent in terms of what they do and what kind of like what they're looking for, and trying to find out of say like the publishing houses that like they're working with, because that will sway what a publishing agent will like take on. And let me just give quite a higher level example. I mean, there'll be agents out there that concentrate on say like romance work, but due to trends in the market or publishing houses that they're like liaising with, they might get requests for nothing but exotic romance or wartime romance, all of those kind of things. So they will usually give some kind of clue, unless they make a general announcement, that is what they're looking for. So if you're an author of a modern day romance, and I think most people will enjoy that, even lots of men, you know, with the emotional side that as like men have. But if that isn't relevant for that agent at that time, there's no point sending it through, because they've given a clear indication of what it is that like they're looking for. Now, even though I brought up 2 points for the question that you asked me, Heidi, from things we discussed before, I still wanted just to revisit them because they give a lot of relevance to the third point, which I think can make an awful lot of difference if people have got the patience and the ability to do it. And this comes down to trying to resonate and connect with that agent. So what these agents are hopefully doing whilst putting content online is giving some kind of clue in terms of the person as to the are. You might get that from the language that they're using, from the points that they're making with content. I know some are very highbrow and very like professional, so that's always difficult to gauge. But maybe on a different channel, they're putting posts of pictures of the recent family holiday or where they visited or things like that. So you need to integrate that, in my opinion, or it's certainly then like suggested to integrate that into thinking which agents that you can approach, because that gives an awfully big clue in terms of the people that you might be able to get along with. And especially so if you really feel you've got something in common with them. So on the 3 commercial points that we touched in terms of researching the agents, in terms of what they're looking for, trying to find out about the publishing houses that they're working with, whether that sways what they're looking for or not, try to give some rise to the like personal circumstances behind the agent, because you know it might just be that, and that more than your book, that gets you the answer to your query, because the agent also feels that they've received a query from someone that they then feel, I'm using the word feel a lot here if you notice, that they feel that they can get along with.
That really makes a lot of sense. No, I mean, I just think that's a really key point. It's a working relationship, but because I think, and tell me if you disagree, because there is this artistic nature to it. It has to be more than your general. It goes a little out of the box of what one would consider a general professional relationship. And I think that's an important point to make. Michael,
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to let the folks know that are hanging out, if you have questions or if you want to come up, this is an open conversation. You're welcome to grab a mic and come and hang out. If you can't come up on stage and hang out, you can always put your questions into the comments, and we will make sure to bring that up for you. We do monitor it. I don't know how long Mike intends to hang around with us today. I know in terms of what we had discussed, we're kind of running up against the boundaries of that, and I want to be respectful of his time. But in the immediate sense, Dan has a question. He had his hand raised, or also Mike. If you have response, feel free. We're just hanging out.
Sure. Well, I've got about another 5 minutes. I can stay. I mean, I'd love to stay for longer. I'm finding I really enjoying this, but my like working day is aligned to the US time. I've had a few emails like coming in, so unfortunately I will have to go shortly just to get onto those. And then I've got some other calls like later, so I'm kind of only halfway through my day, as I think. You might be Michael as well, but yeah, I must go shortly. But still, in order to kind of like support the group, I'm open to like further queries and in the kind of like the question sense. So I don't want to be a stranger from this. So if there's any questions that are asked that I might be able to answer, then hopefully we can keep that dialogue going in some way from like today. And we will always see like what we can do for people, so that the like offer is there.
Absolutely, you've been great, honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
We'd love you to come back. I know you need to get going. We don't want to press your time, but I mean, there's so many. It's really interesting to be able to have someone on the other side of this, per se, other than just the writer, to be able to talk about it from that process side, because obviously we don't have that knowledge, and it's I really appreciate you wanting to come in, and I I mean I could keep going with questions in terms of
Sure.
social. But I'm feeling maybe we should let you go instead of dragging you on another, 10 or 20 minutes, which is probably what'll happen. But what's it to
Look, I know that Dan had his hand up. So is it fair just to let Dan ask his question? I'll like see if I can answer it quickly, and then yeah, by then I probably will need to go. But again, for sure,
Yeah,
I'm
go
pretty
ahead,
sure
Dan, and like we'll leave some other stuff for the future. Obviously, when we talked, we kind of outlined a longer arc of conversations. But yeah, Dan, you got the last.
I'm pretty sure you can answer the question quite quickly. I was wondering for basically from a different perspective. Like I was wondering, like what are the aspects? Like how do you become an agent? What are the aspects of being an agent you enjoy most? Those are questions that I'll put to the side for the moment. I think the question that I decided is more appropriate for this space and more relevant is you talked like a lot about how the agents would react. You said I'm saying feel a lot, so I wondered, is it always instinctual the way that agents would respond to writings being submitted, or like it's ever the case that a writer may become an agent and therefore be more aware of technicalities? Yeah, that was my question.
Okay. Yes, it's more than feasible for a writer, author to like become an agent. Industry experience will add value to that. The like quality of work will obviously give rise to how successful they're likely to be. And if they have had some good success with their work, then it gives them a good opening to obviously then like becoming that. To answer your first question, every agent is different. I touched on what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. And hey, we're not in the market to like compete with people. The market should be big enough to kind of like avoid that. We are building those connections. We have some like good connections already, and whether it's agents or like publishing houses, if we come to meet an author or get approached by an author who we feel has got some value for someone that we know, then even if we don't feel or even if we don't have the opportunity to do anything with that work, we will gladly introduce them to someone that we can. Now, a lot of the industry is run by the financial sense. So to answer the other points of your question, Dan, is that yeah, sometimes agents will look at the book and judge it purely on like the financial aspects of that, the financial value, what can be gained, the returns and value, the like returns on investment, the like sales. They will offset that against how much it's going to cost them to put in the market. All of that, of course, they will look at that objectively speaking, and that might be how lots of agents, maybe more agents that I know, do look at that, and that is a common understanding of the agent publishers kind of like context. But the best way I can answer that again is how we're trying to do things a little bit different. And the more agents that we meet, the more introductions to publishing houses that we have, and writers, authors. That isn't just for our benefit. If we just done this recently. We've been looking for genres of like a certain type. And we've met authors that have approached us with pieces of work that we can't do anything with. And even of authors that we met before that process started, we've then sent a note out to someone and say, hey, take a look at this author. You're more than willing to contact them direct if you want a little bit of a soft intro. We've had some engagement with them through X or whichever channel, or someone on the team has like the offers there, and we don't look for anything back from that. The agent side tends to run on select commissions and then like percentage of commissions. But if we can do that for someone, and especially if it's something without of a piece of work that we can't do anything with, then we will, and we have done.
Excellent. I don't know if you got cut off or if you got a call or something. I feel like we lost your mic though.
Well, this has been a great space. Thank you for hosting it.
Oh well, we'll probably keep going a little bit after this. Mike, can you hear me? Oh, we lost his mic. Can anyone hear Mike? On point?
No, I can't hear him.
Oh,
he might have gotten a call that kind of took over.
Probably. All right. I think. Are you trying to pull?
Nope.
Okay. Are you back, Mike? Or on point? So what should I call you?
He might have to drop out and then come back if something interrupted. But all the same, hey, we very much appreciate you taking the time, and we'll talk again before too long. If you got to go, or if you can get your mic functioning again, that is an option as well. If you want to.
Oh, yeah, no, that's right. I just to apologize. I think I came to the end of the point, but I think my smartphone just kind of timed out, so that's why I just lost the connection. But I thought rather than like leave it as almost as though I kind of like fallen off a cliff. I do need to go, so thank you for that. Thank you for having me. I look forward to like liaising further. The offer is there as like I mentioned before, to help people or answer queries, and I hope what I've said and what's been discussed has added a little bit more value to my people's understanding of what might need to be done, or how they might want to like go about things. So it's let's aim to like keep in touch from there.
Absolutely. I hope you can come back. We can maybe do these from this side, because I find it really valuable. I hope you did too, and I very much enjoyed the discussion. So thanks for coming in, and we will let you go and do your work, sir.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Everybody take care, and let's hopefully chat further soon. Bye-bye.
All right. So Michael, did I hear peacocks in the background of your palatial estate there?
No, there's probably children shouting off in the distance. I wish there's a place that does keep peacocks not too far away from here, but they are not going to be audible from the distance that I'm at. Dan, what did you think? How was this conversation for you? What did what did you get out of it?
There were definitely birds in the background. I heard them too.
Oh yeah, there's birds. Yeah, for sure. There's birds around. No peacocks though.
Oh right. Well, yeah, I really enjoyed the discussion as a dad. So thank you so much for for hosting it. It's great that we've got listeners as well, like whether they're listening live or listening after the discussion's been held.
Yeah, I mean,
Great.
if anyone wants to come up and grab a mic, you're welcome to. As you know, don't stand on decorum, but is that the right way of saying it? No, I think I think the really important points that he was making was this, as with any working relationship, you have to get along with the person. You have to be able to work together. And I mean,
Yeah, trust.
and I know I will say when I was editing, I was a magazine editor for years. When I was doing that, we would go with writers who were not necessarily the absolute best writers, but and it was a trade publication, so their technological knowledge was important. It wasn't just as writers, but so they had to have that. But we would pick the people who were easier to work with to a point. I mean, if someone was just they couldn't string a thought together with their writing, we wouldn't, we'd have to draw a line. But we definitely want to work with the people who are not being difficult, who could turn things in on time, who could meet deadlines. These are things I think people don't think about, especially when you're artistic and or when you're doing art in any way. As writing obviously is our thing here, but and I get that I'm that way, but I mean, being able to meet deadlines, having just some semblance of a business understanding that this is a business on many levels is super important, and I think will get you further. And I think he was really trying to point that out with that and it's a weird space that we're in because you're doing artistic work, but so there is that out of the box part of it, and he was, I think, on point. Was trying to address that yeah, we know you're an artist, but we still have to run a business, but we don't want you to feel left out. And I don't know about anyone else, but I very much appreciated how he was sort of saying, trust your gut, trust your instinct. How do you feel about this person? Is it it's a sort of a professional friendship kind of thing. I don't know. What did you guys think? Michael, Dan, anyone else want a mic?
Yeah, I thought it was a very good um, introduction to the concept in terms of if you don't know anything, then uh, you get kind of that 101 first class on it. Um, but if you do know at least topically what we're addressing, with this conversation today, then hopefully it gives you additional insight into how to go about the process and how to make a better attempt in terms of your pitches or working with a lit agent. Obviously, you and I, we've done all of our stuff indie, self publishing. That's not to say that working with a publisher is unattractive, but I think, at least for us, in terms of the capacity for control, and for me, particularly, just the rate of production and being able to get things out the door and um, be able to move on to another project. That's always kind of like where self-publishing has been attractive to me. Uh, Now, in terms of like working with a publisher, dealing with the entire kind of sequence of how it all works, that's a longer timeline, and there's value to why it is that way. And I think he addressed a lot of that. Obviously, not everything, because we have other um, aspects of this topic that we would like to address, and hopefully have Mike back to talk more about it. And the thing about kind of siloing off this first phase of the conversation, I think, is also because the folks that are hanging out with us regularly here for Writer's Block are either new writers or trying to get their manuscript out there, get their book published, and to give a little bit of the other side of how and why all of that works the way that it does, and to give you options if you do want to go about things that way. I've been very vocal about indie publishing and self-publishing, and being able to have the uh, access to the tools that allow you to do that, like Lulu and KDP, ACX, and others for audiobooks and stuff like that. So to hear the other side of things and to consider, say, like, I always make the analogy of, like, you're going from, like, the minor leagues to the major leagues, or from, like, a small indie label, yourself, your own, to working with, like, a legit proper label in the music industry analogy. And to reissue your work, or to maybe give it a higher level of treatment so that it fits in with all of the needs of the established industry in that way. Hopefully we get the chance to address that stuff too in the future. You know.
I recently interviewed a literary editor, and sort of as with the points that were brought out today, I guess, to an extent, it was the elements that, or the aspects that were most sought after for writers that the editor would look for were reliability and whether they were known or not. But I think with the interview today, it was great to hear it from the agent's perspective.
Well, here's the thing too. Like, this is a conversation space, so very much appreciate you coming up and peppering the conversation with your own questions that are both reactive and insightful. As somebody that hangs out here regularly, because we have our notes that we go off of when we produce this stuff, but I think it works a lot more. Um, it's the conversation's more well rounded, and I would say there are things that we don't necessarily think of in terms of providing a platform for discussion. So that's why we do like the folks coming up to hang out and poke holes in what's being discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm like Michael said, like we're doing indie stuff, but it's interesting to hear it from the other side. I'm curious what anyone else thought about that. I mean, he makes a convincing argument in a very I mean, obviously, he makes a convincing argument in a very gentle way, I guess I would say. So, I mean, and I think, think about that. This is a person, these are people who are dealing with writers, and as he pointed out, we're all introverted on some level. You have to have that sort of introversion because a lot of writing is just sort of introspection. So, I mean, and it's hard to go there if you need to be around people all the time, it's hard to write. I mean, when will you actually do the work? So, I mean, think about the quality of the way that sort of sell that he's saying. It's like in that sort of connection that you have to make with those types of people. So, I mean, it would be weird, I think, for a literary agent to be a total extrovert. It would be uncomfortable for the writer, don't you think? I mean, I don't know. These are things I'm thinking about. I mean, because how do you make a connection with someone like that? They would be constantly, it would be about the extrovert. Extroverts like to be on stage, writers like to contemplate the stage. I don't know. It's kind of it's an interesting dynamic. And so I don't know. What does anyone else think about this?
I
Anyone
thought
else?
maybe I thought maybe extroversion and an agent perhaps might help with marketing
Well,
from a certain angle.
yeah, I mean, as he pointed out, you got to have that balance. But I mean, there's an awareness of how to talk to people who may not be as extroverted, which I think was. Can you guys hear the dogs? I think I set my mic to just voice isolation, but I'm wondering if you guys can hear them. Anyway, but it's kind of an interesting quality, and I think the other important point again was this, how to research the agent. That's kind of on you, and I would like to dig into that a little bit more because so as not to, waste everybody's time.
Well, I posted up a link in the comments and also into the Nest for Query Tracker, which is a platform that allows you to find agents and I think publishers too, maybe editors. I don't know in totality. I've looked at it briefly a few times, but I haven't used it. So it might be good for everyone here to do a little bit of homework in that sense. Take a look at that platform because it is fairly well known, and generally established. Like I've done a little bit of digging into it uh, some months ago. I don't remember where it came up in conversation, but all the same, you know, maybe everybody signs up for that and has a look around and just sees from a very bird's eye view of how that platform has organized the process, and consider how you would interface with how they have organized the process. I'm not saying you need to go and submit queries. Maybe you do. But, in a general sense, I think you'd learn a lot about what the order of operations are for that just from having a look in general.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting topic. I mean, and it's I myself straddle the fence of this idea, and I think we all do because when you start it's like with anything, when you start involving other people, things change. The dynamic changes. You aren't totally in control. It's, you know, and, you know, you don't get to decide everything. I know a lot of time, and how these contracts work. I don't know a lot about that. That would be interesting. And he was talking about there are different types of contracts depending on what it is. And it was interesting to me how heavily followers, where he said followers, how much of an impact you have on social media matters. I mean, that's new, don't you? That's got to be new within like maybe, God, even 10 years. Do you think it's any older than that? Dan, you unmiked.
It's something I've heard before, like recently from a publisher. Is they were looking at follower numbers on X actually.
I've heard mixed things about it. I think X is sort of exploding right now. It's gotten a lot of attention. It's got a lot of spotlights on it for various reasons, mostly politics right now, but I think that I've heard, like all of that is almost better for selling your second book than your first. I mean, I don't know. I gotta say I'm not real up on it. I've been too busy, just writing books. So anyway, Michael, what do you think?
I would say, um, like anything, um, any creative industry, if you are shopping yourself or your project, then they're going to evaluate what you have going on in the social spheres. For a number of different reasons. Like, it's just the nature of daily life at this point to be using social networks. And if you are seeing traction for an artist or a writer or a musician or whatever, on within the circles that they run in, then the likelihood is that you're going to get you're going to begin to like percolate up into that next level of like curation. I would phrase it that way. And like publishing or record deals or funding for whatever it might even be, a startup. If you are getting traction with conversations or usership or readership of a blog or whatever, like, you're going to become unavoidable, and it is going to be a metric by which you are measured.
Yeah, I think that pretty much. I think you're right about that. I mean, and you see that's kind of where certain people have popped out of. I mean, on like the fiction side, God, the Martian, right? What's that fella's name? Andy Weir, is that right? The Martian, right? So he was able to parlay that from his social media, from his websites, from posting that in chapters. And then the other side of it is someone like Jordan Peterson, who I think he got like a book deal. Obviously, it's a nonfiction sort of thing, but from the posts he was making on Quora, he was able to show how successful his Quora posts were.
Well, that's not the full story because he published Maps of Meaning in the late 90s.
But it's a have you I've
I
read
have read Maps of Meanings.
it is he published it, but it's a scholastic book. It's a course book.
Yeah, it's
So I mean,
academic.
not a popular book, and it's not something you would read in the same way. It only so it's basically it was published because he was using it as the book for his course, his college courses he was teaching. I wouldn't almost, which is another way to, if you're teaching a college course and you're a professor. And I had a professor do that, and it was a terrible book. She was a it wasn't even a book she wrote. It was just literally bullet points for 300 pages.
Yeah, but
Um,
not every professor gets their book published either. Like, just because you put something together, that doesn't necessarily automatically like designate it for uh, you know.
but literally the only, well, I mean, Jordan Peterson is an exception, obviously, but for this one in particular, I would say that it was literally published and only used, and she basically forced everyone to buy it in her course. So, well, forced. I mean, you had to take the course. You had to buy her book. So she had an automatic audience. So, so these are just. I think that's different. Scholastic publishing is a way different thing. I shouldn't have even brought up the example, but but you see where I'm going with that.
It's a fair example. It's reasonable to bring up
Yeah,
the
I mean,
point. I know. So last year, when I started doing the Wednesday chats that I was doing, the guy who was co-hosting with me, he had his first book, which was on cybersecurity law. That was through a publisher, and then his more recent book, which was kind of a memoir, but like a historical memoir. His family had been involved with an industry in a town in Ohio for 100 years or something like that. And his book was published through an academic press, a university press. I think the University of Akron, maybe, or something like that. Again, like that, he's not a professor, and his background is vastly different than what that book is about. I mean, he's a lawyer, and their industry was not law; it was, like art materials, actually. So I think, the thing that Mike was stressing is maybe not stressing, but I think illuminating the point of is that there are a lot of variables and there are a lot of different ways to go about the process.
Yeah, and I think another point that I think is important to remember is that he was pointing out that there was some great work that they were just not in a position to be able to promote. So I think from the writer's side of that, being, if you do go that path, you have to realize that being rejected per se, that awful word, doesn't mean you're not good at what you're doing. It just means that it just means that that's not necessarily the right fit, and there can be a billion reasons why. I think, and I think that's important to remember and not let that defeat you just from that side of it. There's just a lot of reasons why things aren't going to get published. Some of them are good reasons and some of them are really terrible reasons.
But
Um
I think like an actor trying to go for um jobs where they might be cast, I think maybe it helps to have a thick skin to an extent.
yeah, and he was, and I appreciated a lot of what he was saying. It's like, do you really want to be famous? I mean, do you really understand what goes along with that? It can be very daunting. Plane runner, you came up.
Hey everybody, I apologize for the road noise if it's really bad. Um, yeah,
Not terrible.
I, 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 I appreciated getting a look at the other side. I think I'm very much like many of us in this space where I've chosen to go independent simply because um, it is about that control element, whether it's control to tell the story that I want to tell, or that I feel that I'm probably boxed out of all of the. And we've talked about this before, where it's like I don't think I can get published through your typical Christian publisher, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get published through your typical, secular publisher either. Um, and so I really just, at some point you're just like, well, I got to tell this story, and I think I'll just see what happens. Um, but I mean, I've only been on social media for a little while, and it's sometimes it's hard because you feel like I've been here a year and I've tried to be a good sport with the people I engage with, and I don't feel like the things I say are completely stupid, and yet your growth is very slow, and that's just the reality of it. And but I guess it's funny. I think Michael was making the comment about I think there was something called like a board where you could track queries and things like that. And I I say this kind of guardedly, but that's the sort of thing that it feels overwhelming to me at the moment. Right now, my only focus is getting this book across the finish line and delivered. And it's really hard to even think about doing that whole other piece of it, and bringing other people in or looking for other things. And I think in my gut, I just go with the idea that the right relationships will come along when the time is right. And I am a little introverted, but I'm not afraid to put myself out there. I feel like I have a decent, social fluency. I can interact with people all right. I know myself well enough to know what works and what doesn't work. Um, anyway, it's a lot to think about, and honestly, in some ways, it's a little intimidating, and it probably does press a bit against that idea of, oh, am I good enough to even put my name out there to other people, or did I choose self-publishing because it feels like a safer road? And I guess those are questions that we all have to just ask ourselves. And back to that why that you were talking about.
Well, two things I'll say. Just yeah, I have no idea why more people don't follow Plane Runner. He does amazing content. And so I think, get your book out, focus on that right now. I just, in terms of Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it, I will say that one of the ways people get followers on here these days is going in spaces all the time. I know Nis can agree with me on this because I mean you get those connections and people start following you from spaces and that really builds a lot of it up. So that's just one of the things I would tell you. If you want to go, you got to throw yourself out there in terms of that. That seems to be where followers come from these days. This week, I don't know what it'll be next week, but right now, that's where it is. So just FYI, that's the thing. I know. You're gonna have to just go in there and start chatting with people. I mean, you do really well in spaces, so I don't think you'd have a problem at all doing that. You go follow, Dr. Heath's a good one. Hitch Slap does great spaces. Anything Honey Badger's in is especially if she's co-hosting or hosting is pretty darn friendly. Um, so I would say that in terms of that. But I know what you mean. It's like I think I would say once you kind of have something to represent yourself, like when you get your book out, I think you're going to feel a lot more comfortable. I would say that. It's like when you have it's like I did this. And I think there's something for to be said for having done that in the indie space. I mean, it's like and I hear you cuz you and I have very similar are very similar in that where we have this Christian bent, but we both will well I haven't read yeah, I haven't read your novel, but we'll both tend to a darker side is my understanding, right? As I do. I've gotten I was it you? Someone reviewed it and said there's horror elements in this, which I found a little shocking, but I've been doing the audiobook and rereading it. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I that is pretty horrible." So, I mean, yeah, I mean that's not going to go for the Christian market who wants for some sad reason they want, minimal jeopardy. They want the jeopardy in the story to be as minimized as possible. And I don't mean to digress too much into this, but and it's sort of sad in a way because that's not the reality. I think people would be better served by stories that, hunt down a deeper emotional truth than something that makes them comfortable in where they are. But obviously, you and I agree on this, but the publishers who would like our work don't seem to exist because they're like the audience wants, our Christian audience wants this, and our secular honest audience wants this, and when you're falling in between that zone, it's problematic because no, what do you do? So, but again, I would say I think you get more comfortable about um talking to people such as literary agents if you have something to stand behind like I did this and I did this on my own terms. um that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't know if that helps or not.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, even before you mentioned it, I was thinking of Andy Weir's example that he was a little different because he kind of reverse engineered it where he was successful as on his website, but then was able to get the book going. And but it, from what I understand, it was like he self-published the book. It did really well, and on the back of that, he then eventually found his way into traditional publishing. So I'm not opposed to that in any way, shape, or form. I think it just for me this first time out, and probably the stage of life that I'm at, I was like, I just got to do this on my own. I don't see any other way that it's going to work. And yeah, but I still am really appreciative of everything that On Point had to say.
Well, it's useful. Yeah, I'll just say one of the things I know everyone else wants to unmic, but I will say about Andy Weir, I read that he shopped that around and they all rejected him. And if you read The Martian, I understand why they rejected him because it didn't fit into what they thought would sell. But the thing about it that was so great is that it was different, right? It wasn't just this same book everybody has read over and over again. So I mean that's something to consider. Anyway, Michael.
Yeah, I think that there's this is something that we've talked about in the past, that these industries have, whatever it is, movies or music, books, whatever the thing is you're trying to pursue as a passion and a career, like these are mature industries that have concluded in many cases, like this much of this type of thing is going to move this many units or generate this many dollars in any given year or in any given 5 year to 10 year period. If there's a large trend of it, right, they can kind of gauge how big the mountain is and what they're going to be able to mine out of it before perhaps an audience or the zeitgeist shifts. And whenever there is something that kind of bubbles up from the indie scene and surprises them, that's not to say that they were wrong. That's just to say that maybe you, as an individual, garnered an audience that you manufactured that audience with the sweat of your brow and like hammered on it and were able to turn it into something and shift it into a success. Like, let's say, for example, the two examples that we always kind of bring up in this case, would be The Martian and 50 Shades, right? But in terms of the success that they were able to achieve, have they manufactured a follow up that has attained that same level of success? I'm not aware of it. So I would say, they have an audience that's built in for them. But again, it's not something that I necessarily pay attention to. I don't even know the woman's name that wrote 50 Shades anymore. But, maybe they do. Maybe it's just a matter of time.
Well, I think the point is there's all sorts of ways to kind of do things, and I like the point he was making was this meteoric type of success is not necessarily a good thing. And I think that's one of the things that's an advantage about being on social media is you can kind of use it like a training ground. So when you say of how you're going to react when people, start reacting to you, how you're going to behave, it gives you the opportunity to kind of practice. So when if you have like a post go viral, you get a taste of that, of what that feels like when everybody's looking at you. And so the more that those sort of things happen, the more attention you get in terms of that. It's a great way to sort of practice at how you're going to behave if something like that happens. It gives you sort of a feel for it. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons they're like, what's your social media following like? Because they're going to know how well you function when you're in a spotlight of some kind, you know? So I think that's something to consider. I mean, there's two sides to that. It's like one, the social media is going to obviously garner you an audience and you've got X amount of people you can market to, but also it shows how you behave in with an audience. So I mean there's a couple things going on there that I would consider. So I mean that's one of the good things about this is it gives you an opportunity to practice and to sort of develop your persona, shall we say. I mean, because we're all sort of a piece of ourself on here. We're not our entire self. I mean, in some ways you can be more yourself on here than you do in your real life. In other ways you're not yourself at all. It's it's an interesting experiment, this social media world in which we live, where everyone's famous and nobody is. It's Andy Warhol's 15 minutes come to life. So, I mean, it's kind of fascinating in a way. So, I mean, that's another thing to consider when you're doing this, you know, how much attention can you tolerate and how much attention can you garner, you know? So, I would throw that out there to consider. Well, we just hit about 11, so we should try and go about 2 hours. So, does anyone have any final thoughts or
Well, I'd say have a look through the comments. As always, I've posted some links, articles, and such in the comments. They're also up in the nest. Um, got the workshop 3 recording up there as well via the speaker cone uh, profile. It's up on all the podcast platforms that I maintain. And there's also a link to the Film 3 space that I do with Chris on Thursdays. Um, we're going to be kind of deconstructing fears a little bit in relation to a collaborative video piece that we threw together for that month's theme. And again, if you want to come and talk, uh, even writing screenplays or just topics and themes in general, everybody's welcome to come and hang out over there. Um, so you can RSVP through that. But I would say, have a look through those articles. Again, the more informed you are, the better you can kind of have forward-looking sight. And next week, we'll be doing the workshop space here. So I will be hosting, and then, I'll get that up as soon as possible so that we can, you know, get everybody paying attention to that in the meantime.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming. I really enjoyed this. I hope Mike of On Point comes back again. Sounds like he wants to. So, Michael and I will work behind the scenes to maybe make him come back on a regular basis in some way. See, because I think I really like the discussion where we're getting both sides of this. It's great to have someone on the publishing side giving us some input as opposed to take care and I'll see you guys. Michael, you're not doing your Space Wednesday, you're doing the 3D one, so or the movie one. So yeah, check that one out.
Yeah, that's next week. Yeah, next week I'll be hosting on Tuesday. Next week I will also have, my regular Wednesday thing. Dan, you got your hand raised? Do you have?
Yeah, I'd just like to say I really enjoyed the space, and I was wondering if you have a subject already in mind for the writer's block next week.
Well, next week's going to be the workshop, so yeah, we do have that one going. But here's what I would say: if there are topics that you guys want us to go into, themes that you want us to go into, pitch them. We're responsive to that stuff. We want this to serve you guys, honestly. We try to do a good amount of prep and drive the conversation, or at least kind of give it some tentpole points to build the thing around. But this is as much for you as it is for us. It needs to do what you want it to do. And yeah, if you've got ideas, I would say, we will put them in the hopper, and then we will put them in rotation if they seem viable.
All right, gang. Well, thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed this. I did. I thought it was a really good conversation. And we'll see y'all next week here. Thanks.